Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Farm to School 101 webinar. We're going to give just a few more moments here for people to continue to log on and join us. So we will start the presentation in just a minute. In the meantime, I'll mention that if you have any issues with audio or anything seems to not be going right with this webinar, that there is a chat box at the bottom of your control panel, and you can send us a note and we can try to help address any issues you may be having. So hang on tight and we'll get started in just a moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Farm to School 101 webinar. I'm Anna Mullen, National Farm to School Network Digital Media Associate, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this introduction to the Farm to School movement. We're excited to present this webinar today as a part of our celebrations of National Farm to School Month. Designated by Congress in 2010, National Farm to School Month is a time that we come together to celebrate the connections happening all over the country between children and local food. It's also a perfect time for us, veterans and new folks alike, to talk about the roots of this movement and how we can work together to connect more of our kids to healthy local food and support local farmers and economies. We are grateful to our Farm to School Month sponsors, the Aetna Foundation, Chartwells, and Mama Chia, who have helped make today's webinar possible. Our panelists today are Helen Dombalis, National Farm to School Network Director of Programs, and Andrea Northup, Farm to School Coordinator for Minneapolis Public Schools. Helen and Andrea will discuss the three core elements of Farm to School: local procurement, education, and school gardens, and how the Farm to School movement is working to connect more than 23.5 million children to healthy local food in schools all over the country. Today's webinar will include 20 minutes of presentation, followed by a short question and answer session. Feel free to ask questions as you think of them during this presentation by typing them into the question window on your webinar control panel. Lastly, we are recording today's webinar, and it will be archived on our website, farmtoschool.org, where you can find past webinars and many more Farm to School resources. With that, I'll hand the presentation off to our first presenter, Helen Dombalis.
Thanks, Anna. When people hear farm to school, they often think of the literal farm to school, getting those farm fresh products into local schools or local procurement, as you can see here on the slide. But farm to school also includes school gardens and education. Education includes everything from integrating food and agriculture into curriculum to farm field trips, farmer visits to the classroom, taste tests, and cooking demonstrations. I'll quickly share that one of my favorite examples of the educational core element of farm to school was watching some preschool children in Tucson, Arizona, learning to count while planting broccoli seeds. As they planted the broccoli seeds in the school garden, they would count 1 seed, 2 seed, and so forth. One of the many wonderful things about farm to school is how the core elements work together. If a child has grown a carrot in the school garden, she will be more likely to try the carrots being served in the cafeteria. If a child has met Farmer Josie, he will be more likely to try the foods being served in the cafeteria by that farmer. While there's no one way to do farm to school, nor a farm to school checklist to complete, it is worth noting that the integration of the 3 core elements is extremely valuable: school gardens, local procurement, and education. Farm to School is at the intersection of many sectors and thus addresses a number of issues, including those listed here on this slide. The obesity epidemic in the U.S. contributes to many issues for children, families, and the country as a whole. People are leaving rural communities, impacting economic viability in those communities. Additionally, we have an aging farmer population, with the average age of a farmer being nearly 60 years old. And finally, I'll just mention that many children have a lack of connectivity to food and agriculture. Thus, as you consider the list of issues seen here on the slide and others that you all work to address in your communities, you can think about how Farm to School works to tackle those. It's not that every child who participates in Farm to School will necessarily grow up to be a farmer, but those children will grow up to ask questions about where their food comes from, how it was produced, and thus support their local communities and families. As you can see here, Farm to School enriches the connection communities have with fresh, healthy, and local food producers by changing food purchasing practices and education practices at schools and preschools. We like to talk about how Farm to School is a triple win for kids, for farmers, and for communities. I'll give a few examples of each of these, starting with the win for children. Kids who participate in Farm to School eat more servings of fruits and vegetables. And it makes sense. If a child has grown a product in the school garden, if they've met a farmer, if they've done a taste test, they're more willing to taste and try and eventually like those new foods. Second, to mention the farmers win, through local food systems and with shortened supply chains, we know that farmers keep a bigger share of the dollar. And then finally on this slide, I'll mention the communities win when farmers reinvest in their local communities and kids take what they learn home with them. One of my favorite stories of communities winning comes from Georgia. There's a wonderful food service director there that shared with us a story of when a local grocery store manager once called her asking to please be notified in advance when they would be doing local food taste tests in the schools. Kids were tasting these local foods and going home asking their parents to go buy them at the grocery store. And then parents are going in and buying the stores out of these products much more quickly than anticipated. This slide highlights some of the benefits to children participating in Farm to School. As I mentioned before, when kids participate in school gardens and meet farmers, they're more willing to taste, try, and like those new foods, ultimately consuming more servings of fruits and vegetables. Additionally, the research on Farm to School shows improvements in academic performance and behavior. The same school I mentioned earlier in Tucson also has spoken about the decrease in bullying that they've seen as a result of launching its Farm to School program, where the children participate in growing food, composting, raising chickens, and much more. They have something else to focus their energy and their time on. As you can see here, and as I've mentioned earlier, both schools and farmers also benefit from Farm to School. And this includes everything from increased meal participation rates when kids are excited about the meals being served, to additional income and new market opportunities for farmers. Finally, To circle back on community benefits, we see that increased farm and local business income gets reinvested in communities. And as I mentioned earlier, kids certainly take what they learn home to their families, thus impacting parents and siblings alike. This fact sheet from the National Farm to School Network, The Benefits of Farm to School, is one of my favorites, as it is essentially a literature review of the research on farm to school, some of which I've mentioned on the previous slides. This fact sheet includes research on benefiting kids, farmers, and communities, and it can be found at the link on that slide. So now that we've talked about what farm to school is and why it matters, I want to spend a minute talking about who the National Farm to School Network is, what we do, and how we do it. The National Farm to School Network is working to expand farm to school across the country. We serve as a hub for information, advocacy, and networking for schools and communities working to bring local food sourcing and food and agriculture education into schools and preschools. We connect people to resources, people to people, and people to policy. I'll mention a few examples. We have an extensive resource database. We host webinars such as this one. We produce fact sheets. We have a wonderful DC-based policy team working to advance farm-to-school supportive policies and building capacity for farm-to-school policy at the state and local levels. We also lead the National Celebration for Farm-to-School Month every year, as Anna mentioned earlier. And then every other year, we host the National Farm to Cafeteria Conference, which is a place and a time to share resources and also to connect people to people. That conference will take place next year in June in Madison, Wisconsin. Finally, I'll just mention and show you this slide in that we connect people to one another through our national staff, our 8 regional leads, and our 51 state leads for the 50 states in Washington, D.C. And then we have more than 12,000 network members throughout the country. So with that, I want to introduce Andrea. One of the school districts we work closely with and are continually learning from is Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrea to talk about their farm to school work.
Thank you, Helen. And again, I'm Andrea Northup, and I'm glad to be talking to you today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm going to go over a little bit about how here in Minneapolis we handle the procurement side of farm to school, and then I'll follow up with our educational and community engagement aspects of our farm to school program. All right, so briefly, we are a small or mid-sized city school district. About 2/3 of our students are eligible for free or reduced price meals, and we have quite a variety of cultures represented and ethnicities represented in our schools. We do just over 40,000 meals a day at 72 different schools around the district. The way our district is structured is we have a central kitchen where I'm sitting now, so if you hear any loud noises or bumps, that is why. And then we have elementary, middle, and high schools. Now, as of 4 years ago, every single one of these schools was getting prepackaged, essentially microwave meals that were heated and served on site. And we're undergoing a lengthy process to get kitchens in every single school again, under the direction of our new director, Bertrand Weber. So right now we have high schools and middle schools all cooking on site, and then we have some of our elementaries still using the heat and serve model while we get those kitchens up and running as fast as possible. We have 2 designations for our local and farm to school products that I'll tell you about. Farm to school is when we work with small, sustainable farmers really close to our district, and we contract with them for produce items for the following school year. Local items are when we purchase things more through our traditional procurement methods, so our produce company or our food vendors, not through contracts, but through our regular procurement methods. So I want to explain a little bit just how this produce looks on our menus. We might get a frozen vegetable from a local source, or a whole fruit, something like broccoli on the salad bar. We incorporate farm to school and local items in our entree recipes. This here is our curried chicken bowl. And then also as condiments like matchstick carrots or diced jalapenos to put on our entrees. Here's another example. We work to source some chicken drumsticks from nearby. We've blended some local kale into our salad blends on our salad bars. We serve composed bean or grain salads every day on the salad bar, and they might include local ingredients. And then our favorite way here in Minnesota to serve local food is our roasted sides. So we use a lot of winter storage crops and serve them with olive oil, salt and pepper, roasted almost every day in our cooking sites. To get that process going, we start in the wintertime. We look at what's growing around here in Minnesota. We map out our menus for the coming school year to feature the items that are going to be in season during the school year. We then invite farmers to talk with us and respond to a request for information about what they can provide for the coming school year. So we document exactly what we're going to be needing for the upcoming school year, and farmers respond with how much they can provide and at what price. If you look at the cucumber line here, you can see some of the information we put in this RFI, request for information. We'll detail what products we'll need, what pack size, the approximate delivery periods, and then farmers respond in those red columns with the quantity that they can supply and some more information about those products. We then do some serious number crunching. We look at what the farmers can provide and at what price, and we look at what yield that means for our intended usage for that product. And we see what we want to spend our money on for the coming school year. We notify the farmers of what they'll provide, and we talk with them. The top picture here is our partners at the University of Minnesota talking with farmers about food safety. The bottom two pictures are giving farmers a tour of our nutrition center or central kitchen. We also take the farmers to our produce company so they can see where they're going to be delivering their products. We invite them to lunch at a school so that they can see the end result and meet the students who will be eating their food. We also get really specific with them about the product specifications. So for example, you'll see the zucchini up top there. It explains to the farmers exactly how we'll end up serving that product, what range of size we can use for the product, how it needs to be packed, washed, and we even have pictures of all the different products and what the sizing and pack should look like. This is important because a lot of the small sustainable farmers we're working with are not used to working with wholesale or large volumes of institutionally packaged products. The way the flow of product works is from the farm to sometimes an aggregator or a group of folks who are aggregating produce from multiple farms, to our produce company, Russ Davis, and then delivered to our nutrition center or school directly. So during the school year, I work with all the folks in this food chain to make sure that each week we're incorporating as much farm-to-school product from the farms as possible. All right, I'm going to give you a few examples here about how we make this work. I know sometimes it's really easy to just order products from a produce company and have them arrive at your door the next day, but we think it's worth it to make this farm-to-school food chain happen, and it can happen in a way that makes sense for the farmers and the schools. My first example is butternut squash. So we serve butternut squash roasted and diced on our menu, and even though butternut squash is a really difficult product to peel, cut, dice, and roast, we make it work through Farm to School because our farmer gives us the largest butternut squash she has on her farm. The small and medium-sized butternuts she has no problem selling at a premium to the food co-ops in our area. And then sometimes she has these large squash that she can't really sell because consumers don't want a 15 to 20 pound squash to use in their kitchen. So we found a way to make this work for her and for us, because we get a better yield on those jumbo-sized squash. Ariel here grows our kale, and we started working with him because a restaurant partner told us about some kale that he had that was damaged by hail. So it had some holes in it, and he couldn't sell it to his normal outlets. But since we're dicing and shredding that kale for salads and use in our schools, hail-damaged kale was no problem. Now Ariel's growing tons and tons of kale for us every year that we feature in our apple kale salad, which looks a little nasty in that picture, but it's really, really good, and you can find the recipe on our website. Kids are really digging it. They renamed it Green Lava Kale Salad after we did a big taste test. It'll be on our menu for Food Day next month. Or not next month, in a couple weeks. This here is the Hmong American Farmers Association. This is a group of Hmong farmers, and this is a group of our staff going out to the farm to visit them and see where their food comes from. We worked with Hoffa this year on cauliflower, which is slightly difficult to grow in Minnesota, as we realized. You'll see it roasted there, which works really well. You'll see some nice browning, salt and pepper, olive oil, like I mentioned. But we had some issues with the cauliflower. The first ones came in were yellow, which is typical of sustainably grown cauliflower, but our produce company was not ready to handle yellow cauliflower, and they had a lot of issues with their staff rejecting the cauliflower because it wasn't the traditional white, beautiful cauliflower you'd expect from California. Then we had some cauliflower with some flowering and browning. We had some more browning and molding. We had some more browning and molding, and just kept having issues with the cauliflower. When it worked, the product was awesome. It was a huge hit with our schools, and our lunch ladies or lunchroom coordinators expressed that the quality and flavor of this cauliflower was 10 times better than the white California cauliflower. But this just goes to show that sometimes you can have product quality issues that you have to work through and communicate with farmers in order to make it happen and get that really high quality product for the kids. Now on to some of the education and community engagement that we do. We do a couple of taste tests every year of new or upcoming products just to get kids excited about where food comes from, how to try something new in just a small amount, and how to think outside of the realm of nasty or delicious. We do the fresh fruit and vegetable program, and this month, this year, every Tuesday we're doing a new interesting fruit or vegetable in our fresh fruit and veggie snack to highlight local foods and to highlight interesting and exciting foods and encourage kids to try new things. We work with a group of great chefs in our area to encourage kids to try new things and also to get some great celebrity endorsement of our menu changes. Every year we have a big farm-to-school barbecue in September featuring a VIP corn shucking contest that's always a big hit. We work with our chef partners to do a junior Iron Chef competition every year, highlighting middle schoolers and getting them to dig into some great local food and recipes. We're piloting a garden to cafeteria program this year where 4 schools in our district are harvesting and serving their school garden produce in their salad bars. And Minnesota Thursdays are a really big local food promotional program where the first Thursday of every month we serve an all locally sourced meal and highlight the farmers who work with us to make that happen. And I'm going to leave you with just a few takeaways from our experience here in Minneapolis when it comes to farm to school. First of all, start small. Start with one item, maybe replacing green beans with locally grown green beans, replacing an apple with a locally grown apple. I think you'll be surprised at the flavor, quality, and response of the students. But don't be afraid to just start with one item rather than digging into revitalizing your whole menu all at once with local items. Use your resources like the ones Helen shared, the National Farm to School Network. The USDA has some great farm to school resources, as well as other schools or partnerships in your area. My third suggestion is to investigate the flow of produce in your school district. Do you have a produce company that you're working with? Do they already have some local partners that you could jump on board with? Start by analyzing how produce works in your school district and see if that can give you some ideas for how to make changes. And my final suggestion is talk to farmers. Almost every success we have is reliant on really great partnerships that we have with farmers. They are on speed dial on my phone. I am in communication with them all the time, and they give me great ideas and are really inspiring to work with because they really care about getting fresh local food to our kids. I'll close here by saying you can visit our website, Nutrition Services. You can probably Google it as a better way, Minneapolis Public Schools Nutrition Services. You can also find us on Twitter at MPS_TrueFood, so you can always get some ideas or share your ideas with us. Thank you so much for having Helen and I present today. We're just thrilled, and we wish we could hear all of you present some of the great ideas you have about farm to school.
Thank you so much, Helen and Andrea, for that really fantastic presentation and for those really wonderful examples of how farm to school is working in communities. I'd like to invite our attendees to send any questions they have in. You can do that through the question box on your control panel, and you can send those in, and then I will ask those questions to Helen and Andrea for them to answer. In the meantime, while you are sending in those questions, I want to highlight just a few resources that we have available to you as you continue to stay engaged with the movement. We'd like to invite you to join our network of more than 12,000 farm-to-school advocates and practitioners, and you can do this at farmtoschool.org. As a member, you'll receive our monthly email newsletters, and we'll keep you up to date on the latest stories, best practices, learning opportunities, and policy actions to help farm to school grow nationwide. Save the date for our 8th National Farm to Cafeteria Conference, which will be held next June in Madison, Wisconsin. This biennial event brings together people from across the country who are working to source local food for institutional cafeterias and foster a culture of food and agricultural literacy. We'd like to invite you to connect with your Farm to School network lead in your state or region to learn more about starting programs and getting involved in your area. And lastly, we encourage you to visit our resource library. This database hosts hundreds of farm to school resources and is searchable by topic, setting, and location. You can find out more about each of these opportunities to stay engaged at farmtoschool.org. All right, so we have some questions coming in. Our first question is one for Andrea. Andrea, someone asks about the junior chef competition, and they want to know how that works and what the goal of that event is.
Sure. The goal of that event is really to just get kids excited about good food and local food. The way it works is we work with a few great chef partners that we have through our True Food Chef Council. We partnered each chef with 2 middle school students who entered a contest, an essay contest, to be selected to participate. And then we worked with a few local partners to get the food and space donated for the event. Feel free to shoot me an email if you want to learn more. I've got all sorts of information about how we planned and carried out that event.
Great, thank you. This is a question that maybe both of you would have something to answer. What's the best way to go about making initial contact with a farmer?
Well, this is Andrea here. I would say, just ask a farmer what's growing this season. What are they good at growing? Where do they sell to? What do they have? I mean, I would say the best place to meet up with them might be at a farmer's market where you can see their products or see examples of some of the items that they're growing or that they grow well. I think farmers are really proud of what they're doing, and so they're usually very happy to talk with you about their farm and what they're up to, what their practices are.
And this is Helen. I will add to Andrea's suggestions that it's also a great opportunity to connect with your Farm to School state lead. So as I mentioned earlier, the National Farm to School Network works with 51 folks around the country, and those state leads oftentimes do have great contacts with farmers. Some states have even done some mapping work to map out farmer contacts for Farm to School. So by going to our website, farmtoschool.org, and pulling up the contact info for your state lead, that would be a great opportunity as well to find those farmers.
That's a good idea, Helen. We have a wholesale farmer and farm to school farmer directory here that our Department of Agriculture puts out. So your state might have a similar resource.
To follow up on that question, we actually have some food producers on here who are asking how they can connect with schools. Is there anything you would add for them?
I think more and more states or regions are hosting farmer and school networking events. Our school district has an informational meeting each year to just meet up with farmers who are potentially interested in farm to school or interested in selling to us. So I might reach out to your School Nutrition Association chapter, your National Farm to School Network state lead, or even just stop on by a school in your area and see if you can start to have conversations with the nutrition services folks.
And this is Helen. In addition to what Andrea recommended, one neat resource is the USDA Farm to School Census. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture a couple of years back, and then more recently, has surveyed school districts around the country about their participation in farm to school. And if you're wondering what's happening as a farmer with a school district in a community in which you live or a neighboring school district, you can go online and pull up the USDA Farm to School Census and then click on the state that you live in and then dig into the very specific school district data, and you might be able to look at that data and realize, wow, they're already pretty engaged. Maybe they'd be interested in meeting another farmer, or perhaps they may not be as engaged, but looking for connections. So that might be a handy resource as well.
Great, thank you both. I want to just acknowledge that we are at our half-hour mark that we said this webinar would go. We do have a lot of questions that are great, so I think we'll spend just about 5 more minutes asking questions to Helen and Andrea. So please stick around if you have time, and if you don't, I want to thank you for joining us today. Helen and Andrea, here's a question about policy. What have been some of the successful ways that either the National Farm to School Network or Minneapolis Public Schools has worked with policies and enacted legislative policies to find support for farm to school?
That's a great question. I'm happy to start and then pass it off to Andrea. So policy, of course, happens at all levels, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. So I'll start by mentioning at the local level, one of the really wonderful things that can be done is working with school districts on their local school wellness committees, or local school wellness policies. So any school that participates in the National School Lunch Program is required to have a local school wellness policy. And one thing that we've seen done is have those schools actually write in farm to school as a way that they want to achieve more wellness. So for example, doing farm field trips and school gardens. On our website, if you go to farmtoschool.org and click on policy, you can actually pull up some examples of local wellness policies that have integrated farm to school. And then on that same page, I'll mention that at the state level, the National Farm to School Network partners with Vermont Law School Center for Agriculture and Food Systems to produce a state level policy report. And that really is a comprehensive guide of all of the incredible work that's been happening in states around the country to advance farm to school. And what you'll see is that there is a broad range of types of legislation. So it's everything from creating a state coordinator position within a state agency to things like what's happened at the local and state level in some states, including in Minnesota, where the governor may just proclaim a week as farm to school week or a month as farm to school month. So there's really a broad range of policy opportunities from getting started to kind of really institutionalizing farm to school within state agencies. And then finally at the federal level, the National Farm to School Network and some of our other national partners have lobbied Congress to create the USDA Farm to School Grant Program, which is a competitive grant program that's now up and running. Right now, it's funded at $5 million a year to provide grants to schools and farmers and tribal communities and organizations around the country to actually plan for and implement and provide training and technical assistance around farm to school activities. So if you don't already know that about that program, I definitely encourage you to look on the USDA Farm to School website. And then if you're interested in policy, I also encourage you to reach out to our policy team, Erin McGuire and Natalie Tallis. They are, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, working in Washington, D.C. right now as we speak to update that federal legislation to get even more federal support for farm to school.
Awesome. And I will add that here in Minnesota, we're actually working with a coalition of other health, food, nutrition, and farming advocates to do some state-level policy advocacy work. So we've defined some priorities that we'd like the state government to enact in the next legislative session, and we're partnering with a couple of different groups to pull together a pretty strong team of advocates to make that happen. That's where we're at the state level here in Minnesota, and our school district is helping in that process.
Great. Thank you both so much for those answers. Those were great. We have a few questions here about issues around food safety when serving food from school gardens. Is there anything, any resources the two of you can highlight about addressing concerns about food safety from food that comes from the school garden?
Absolutely. A lot of school districts are making this happen, the process of serving school garden produce in school meals, but food safety is certainly something to be considered. We have a whole process that we've developed in conjunction with the USDA Farm to School program, based on some models in Denver and Oregon, where we have a food safety checklist, a food safety training for gardens who are going to be serving produce to us. We have a pretty specific harvest protocol that schools need to follow that involves hand washing. It involves clean harvest totes that they're harvesting into, and it involves a tedious wash process that our staff do in the kitchen. So as long as this produce is being handled properly, there's no reason why food safety concerns can't be prevented or mitigated. But that is a process that you and your school really need to think through. So I'm happy to share our resources if you're interested.
And this is Helen. I will just add that this is an excellent question that comes up quite often. There are definitely issues when you're working with school gardens where it becomes important to pay attention to policy. It really can depend on the local or state level. So until recently, for example, Baltimore did not allow for edible school gardens. They've recently changed that, and they have a great resource online now. We could certainly, if folks are interested, you can follow up with me, and we can make sure to share that with you all. or I can even paste the link here in this chat box. But the state of Arizona, I know, for example, they do have a procedure that one has to go through, a kind of checklist, as Andrea was talking about, for school gardens. So it is important just to check in on local and state laws. But school gardens are just an incredible opportunity to really get kids engaged in learning and in food and agriculture. So as long as you go through the kind of checklist and make sure you're signing off with your local and state laws, it's a great opportunity. And for the most part, I'll say that local and state laws do not have any prohibitions on consumption of school gardens.
All right, thank you both. This will be our last question, and it's one around the cost difference in sourcing local products. Is it more expensive, and what are some funding opportunities for schools looking to start farm-to-school programs?
Well, here in Minneapolis, we have found that in some cases farm-to-school product is more expensive, and that's just a function of the way our food system is. Somehow it is cheaper to get cauliflower shipped in from California as opposed to grown right here by a group of immigrant and refugee farmers right down the road. And this is for a lot of reasons. But what we do here in Minneapolis is try and find particular ways to make things work. One example I gave was the jumbo-sized butternut squash, right? So that's a product that our farmer cannot sell on the open market, and as a result can get to us at a cheaper price. We also work in economies of scale. So that farmer is delivering 1,000 pounds of butternut squash at a time in a giant palletized bin. So she's saving the cost to her of putting that in small bushel boxes and putting a sticker on every little squash and all of these other things that she doesn't need to do if she were selling it to the conventional market. We work with contracting with farmers. So because she knows she'll have a market for that squash, she can give us a better price because she doesn't have to call up on the phone every week to her buyers or sit at the farmer's market for 8 hours on a Saturday. So again, all these little cost savings add up so that we can get a more comparable farm-to-school price. In the end, like our lunchroom coordinators pointed out to me, our farm-to-school products are essentially a completely different product than what we would get on the conventional open market. The flavor profile and quality of the cauliflower we get from our Hmong farmers is just miles beyond what we would typically get. And so that value to us actually makes a 5 to 10% cost increase worth it. And we find that kids show up to eat on days when there are farm-to-school products. Our Minnesota Thursdays, we see huge participation increases from kids who aren't typically buying meals. And what that means is when our participation is up, our revenues are up, and then we have more money to reinvest in our program.
And this is Helen. I'll just add to what Andrea said, that examples of the things she has given, like the oversized butternut squashes or just looking at cosmetically imperfect seconds, are great opportunities. We've heard a lot of stories around the country about apples that are just too small for folks to take to your traditional retail outlets. We kind of have an ideal size in a grocery store for what an apple should look like, but then those smaller apples can be great, for example, for preschool kids or elementary school kids. So that's definitely one thing that should be explored. I would also say looking at seasonality is really helpful. So this can be everything from buying product, for example, in the summer, and depending on the availability and opportunity you have to process those foods, you can then serve them in the school months. I know a number of schools, for example, will peel and wash and peel peaches or strawberries during the summer, or do the same with tomatoes, and then make salsas or sauces or jams that they can serve during the school year. And then I think too, another thing just to keep in mind is a balance. So some food service directors that we work with will talk about the fact that they can't necessarily go to serving everything local. So they really try to pay attention to price points and think about the fact that there are things that they may be able to get from USDA at a lower price point than they would on the conventional market, to then allow for some flexibility with things that they can get locally. So for example, getting a piece of chicken from USDA so that then they can go get the grass-fed beef from the local market. So those sorts of things certainly work. And then finally, I'll just mention planning ahead with farmers can really help as well, where you actually get into contracts and contract with farmers ahead of time. So as opposed to going to a farmer when the harvest is ready and you're trying to set up that price point, actually working in advance to set up those contracts can be really helpful. It's called forward contracting, so that you know in advance as the school and the farmer knows in advance as the farmer what that contract will look like. And so the farmer can then plant, you know, the amount of carrots that you think you'll need, and then you can get at that economy of scale to negotiate a price point that'll work for everybody.
Well, once again, Andrea and Helen, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge about farm to school with us and with all of our attendees. And thank you all who have joined us for this webinar for coming today and for learning more about farm to school, about ways you can get involved. We know that there are quite a few questions that we weren't able to answer today, so I'd like to encourage you to reach out to us. You can find our contact information on farmtoschool.org and all of the resources that we've mentioned today. I'll say again that we are recording this webinar and it will be available at farmtoschool.org for you to watch. Thanks again, everyone. Happy Farm to School Month, and we're so glad you joined us today.